20 years. So my problem is the same, like data capturing. So we have like residents and like we have data entry operator who would be doing data entry. So for COVID, we employed almost like 50-60 data entry operators, just because the report has to be going in time and everything. So what sir said, like if it could be involved, like as we said, like voicemail, so that would be like really very good because lot of energy and time goes in entering data only.
Exactly. Yeah. I've been a clinician for 30 years before I came to, so that I understand the problems.
It's like very
two practical problems that we have in a lab environment. The accuracy is remarkable. I mean, you get almost 90+%. Unfortunately, in civil hospitals, you have one doctor who is looking at one patient, examining him, and there are 25 others who are standing in the queue and still talking to each other. So, detecting what the clinician is saying becomes a cocktail party problem.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe we would do it at least for indoor, for OPD, like usually in OPD we don't do all details. At the end of the OPD they put entry data. Okay, and the lab and all is like, it is mandatory unless and until. But now unfortunately when I went to Sassoon just last week, all HMIS is removed because it was on contract basis for 10 years or something. So it is gone.
We have the dean.
So if it is in contract basis, people are used to using it, they learn for many years. And
yes.
Just studied with writing. So everybody is used to writing. Okay, our staff member also, nursing staff member also used to writing. Yesterday you are visited. So if we just take an iPad and just give the each OPD and every person in the ward also, they just write, it will directly go to the store data. And that is the real data which is in the writing also. It is not mistaken by anybody. Data entry person, we don't know the medical terms, and the writing is, everybody is responsible for his writing. That is the main thing. So if that way we create an environment that is the friendly environment which we are doing daily basis, because change the people who is in service for 30 years, 35 years, it is very difficult. And if we enter just on the iPad, he is writing with this thing, it is very easy and easy to collect also.
This thing, record when the patient is registered, he's captured. When he comes, walks in, already his basic data is I don't list, and I just have a box in which I already start scribbling. That will make things much easier than a voice.
Yeah, and in recent years, like you must have seen voice recognition, right? Your phone responds so well, right? Voice recognition is very good. Handwriting recognition is very good. So all the post addresses in the US,
Tools
right?
are there, yeah.
Yeah, all the post addresses, it's like machine detected, right? So you write by hand, but all the letters in the US are like machine detected, right? So the handwriting recognition is good enough now, and I'm sure
There is a small caveat here that I would like to add. In terms of identification pin codes, is a fairly cut and dried problem. Yes. You get almost 99% accuracy. Problem with we have faced with identifying whatever model, whether DNN, CNN, RNN, जो भी आप लगाएं, for clinical data is that this model has to be trained on clinical data.
Yeah.
You can't have a generic ASR which will do a detection of what the clinician is speaking. You will end up with something like 75-80% accuracy. So this data model needs to be trained on clinical data.
That is what the project
That is what really needs to happen.
Yeah, we had this company, back in our hospital, like in that time, 10 years ago, when voice recognition was not good, we used to have US doctors dictate. After they see the patient, they'll go and record on the phone. Actually, come to India.
That was also UK. I mean, 20 years back, it was all dictaphones, and then someone would transcribe it and things like that.
So companies came in and they used that for training.
Yeah.
You see, that is training data, right? And I think that's a project we need to do.
We are working with one of the startups,
Yeah.
and they have a very decent ASR accuracy that we have seen.
Right.
We have our own models also.
Yeah.
I have a team that is working on it. But I think more can be done on it for sure.
Exactly. So yeah, so that's the data entry part. That's definitely an hassle, right? But and we got a group here. We can work on solving it, and there are projects definitely that we can do in that space. But Dr. Aher is going to speak, but I want to have Sean also speak. I have requested Sean to hold on till the end. I'll tell you why, right? all of you have entered your question. Right? And I want you to have that, that's very original, I want you to stick with it. Right? And that is your entry, want to persist with that. So all the stuff we are talking here are the tools. They may happen, they may not happen. Right? But your question is what drives you. And you have to keep on doing with that. So whatever we present over here, whatever tools we present, they might not be good enough. But don't get disheartened or don't be like, okay, that is the end of everything. And the tools are there, but if you don't have that question, all this is completely useless. Right? So want you to stay with that question. We will follow up on that. And then the whole lot of work which will present what happened in the West. Again, don't get intimidated. Don't get and you don't have to do it that way. You have to do it. Don't wipe out your idea.
So with that, apart from listening to the conversations during the meetings, I went online and looked for how it's been used. So I think I learned a lot in a very short period of time, and that made kind of a lot of sense to me. And I will not touch so much upon the research part, but a bit on education, which you already mentioned in your survey, that finally everything percolates into the curriculum. And I'll just share my slides with you. Health professionals, what opportunities does it offer for students? What opportunities it offers for faculty, as researchers already discussed, and as educators, and what can be the possibilities and way forward. So what struck me most after going through a lot of the literature was that the data supports research to improve healthcare quality. That was, most of the studies showed that. And there is definitely, it has a role in bringing about health equity. There's a lot of papers on the community also, data from community. How I2B2 tool actually has helped to combine data from community into other data, pertaining to same diseases or something. And so that's a big challenge in our country. There's a lot of disparity between urban and rural areas, and we're looking to digital health helping us move forward and kind of bridge that gap. But this tool would be something great if we can do the research in terms of data in such a diverse country like ours. Different disease patterns emerging from different areas, or we can meet local needs, both in terms of healthcare, in terms of curricula also, addressing the local curricula. Then there is also literature related to education of health professionals. Problems when we need to make simulations, so problem-based learning and assessment. All these have got the tool being used to take forward and make the quality of education also better. So this is one study which is using I2B2 to bootstrap rural health analytics and learning networks. So what they have done is, as I just mentioned, they have converged rural data with the common data sharing and learning network so that they can derive more meaningful solutions both for the rural areas and educate themselves about what is happening in the rural areas. To a phase of competency-based education. So in competency-based education also they have used. Now we all know that the idea of bringing the CBME in is to teach in an authentic workplace and to assess them in an authentic workplace. So now what they have started doing, like for assessment, we are having portfolios. So this is I think it's been done in Britain quite a lot, and we will also soon be doing it. So all the data of exams particularly is recorded. Teaching learning, I think we'll start doing it gradually. But when a lot of data examination or assessment data is available, we can do that holistic assessment of the students from the data. So what we are talking of, what is happening at the formative level, because we know that there's a lot of data manipulation, scope and all those things. So we still want to rely only on the final exam for awarding grades and all that. But if we have a system wherein all this data is entered in a way which cannot be manipulated, then we will get the true assessment of the student through a continuous assessment format. So that is the main use in CBME. And the data is available to be able to provide feedback, monitor progression, and also to support their learning. Then in problem-based learning, we can create our problem scenarios on which we do the teaching. we can develop scenarios for simulation and MCQs using the data from hospitals, from the authentic data. Then, of course, research has already been mentioned, and digital health is another area, and health and medical informatics. So these are courses which for students, the training programs, which can be started as electives, so that they become more knowledgeable, and we have innovations coming forward from their side, from the future leaders. So now, having gone through some of literature which shows us all this, where do we stand? So we have the numbers. We have healthy population, we have young population, we have patients, we have students, we have teachers, and we have we just have to develop the mechanisms to collect data from all these resources. We at MUHS are one of the best health science universities in the country. We have progressive and visionary leadership, and a source like I2B2 is an open source, and we have experts to teach us how to learn it and implement it. So I think there is nothing stopping us from going ahead with this. The weakness I think already mentioned, we are all keen to have our own data on which we can make decisions about our community, our patients and everything. But unfortunately, because the system is yet to get in place, we end up referring to the Western literature. So this is a great opportunity for us to bring that in. And limited or minimal knowledge and understanding of data systems. So I think that capacity building is required. And once we have that, I think the data would be richer than many other parts of the world. So that's the opportunity. The threat I see to everything is our own selves. Sorry for saying that, but some of us will be pessimistic, some of us will be very cynical, because those really the ground realities are bad. They make us feel that way. And there will be resistance because we're already overloaded with work. I think so many inspections, so much workload on teachers, it's really hard. And so we end up being with the status quo. So I think that is something, so I think all this exercise that's happening, it's good that all the discussion happened before I spoke, is we have to find a way forward. So that is what I think this opportunity is going to help us with. And I think that's all, so let us begin.
So just imagine, this is my commitment to imagine that you are a student going for rotation, and in the minimal time that you spend there in the evening looking at patients, looking at what's happening, you get to see a few patients, right? But you never get to understand what's the big picture. So imagine if you have a curated search index, how will it change the thinking process of the student, right? So the challenge with that, though, is that it is a little bit difficult to measure. Like when you do a quality improvement project, it's a little bit difficult to measure. But that's why the HoloLens project, right, that Abhinandan you shared about, right? How making the HoloLens available enable teaching of anatomy, right? So we need to think of some way of how to measure the effect on students, on their, how much they feel empowered and how much they feel, how it affects their learning. Because education is an important component. It's a longer way of quality improvement, but we need to measure how we're going to do that. So we're doing well on time. Do we have any questions, other comments from the audience? Otherwise, what's going to happen is I'm going to invite Sean and then Diane to speak for a few minutes. And then we'll have an open session. But maybe we can take one or two more questions at this point in time. Yeah.
How the data has changed the practice. Because when people do not have a trust that my data is going to be used or not, they will be kind of pessimistic, why I'm doing this. So we need to have some of the stories, success stories, where your data has changed some of the practice. That communication needs to be done. I think then people will be inspired and empowered to have a quality data. So even in the education as well as in the practice, or even in somewhere place it is being going on, then it need to disseminate to the other colleges. I think it will be a positive impacts on the stakeholders, because sometimes they doubt because they don't know how it is going to be utilized. So I see when the COVID was there, everyone's doing quality data because they know our data is going to have an impact. There was a visible things into their eyes, but in general we do not know how it's going to be used. So I think that part we need to emphasize again.
Oh, you mean the hospital administrator, right? Even the doctor is the doctor, right? Yeah, they need to know, okay, everyone needs to know, okay, well, I'm going to put this data and what is the effect, right? How is it going to help? So that's why, like, that's what we said, the first point, the value demonstration, but it doesn't matter, like, it's going to be the lowest value. What is it we have to demonstrate quickly? But that is important to change the system. So I completely agree. And trust, security, right? Security is something people here will not come up, but sir knows that, it's very important to protect the integrity and the security of the data. And that's where the IT expertise is required. Any other questions in informatics? And so Sean did fellowship in informatics, and his mind changed that, okay, I can do things in neurology, wet lab, but there's more need for data. I think the phase where we are right now over here. And so he created the tool and it changed how the hospital, people do research. So I'm going to talk about that and also how it changed nationally.
So it's great to be here. I think that Kavi and I have been planning this for a long time, thinking about different ways that a tool like I2B2 can be incorporated into a better understanding of practice. And I know we had a discussion earlier about difficulties in getting doctors to be able to enter data, and other healthcare clinicians and workers to enter healthcare data, because we're all very, very pressed for time. And so really when the call came out to do analysis of healthcare data to understand our practice and to recruit patients for clinical trials and understand what was happening in our patient population, we did not turn to getting doctors to collect more data. Instead, we asked the question, what data is already there that people are not using that we can then develop into making screens and profiles of practice and help us to recruit the patients for clinical trials and do research using what's available in practice. So we focused on a number of different kinds of data. We focused on simple registration data, which has a lot of information in it, demographics of patients and different ways, oftentimes, the religions of the patients are captured and so forth. That's very valuable just to know the profiles of your patients in different clinics, for example, that they're registered in. Then we turned to billing data. So we capture diagnoses in billing data. Now, they're not great diagnoses, but we'll talk about that in a minute. They have a lot of problems with the accuracy of some of the diagnoses. But still, it's a good place to start in order to see what can be done. Then we captured the labs, straight out of the laboratory system. And we didn't need to get labs in real time. We could wait days to collect all the labs from different systems and put them into, because we're going to be looking at patients like overall. And we're going to be finding patients that we're interested in, but it's not based on yesterday's data, it's based on data from maybe a month ago even. So there's time to put the data together from the laboratory. And then we got data from pharmacy. So pharmacy was very important, because then we know the medicines they're on. And you'll see that if we know the labs and the medicines they're on, and we have demographics, we can actually infer what diagnoses they actually have. So you can use different kinds of data to kind of fill in using computation of various kinds. Very logical kinds of computation, like someone who has diabetes is probably going to be on metformin and have a hemoglobin A1C that's greater than 6.5. And so then you can say, okay, and then I'm going to add the label of diagnoses to this, diabetes to this patient. And there's many, many diseases like this where you get these profiles. And so you can actually develop, using only the data that you have available, a very rich set. Now, the more data that comes in, the better, right? You always want more data. But even with a little bit of data, you can do a lot. All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the applications of I2B2, and this is in the space of data analytics. So not a hospital electronic medical record system. That is not what this is. This is collecting the data after the patients have been seen. And it can even be a month later, out of those systems. So we take it out of those systems, we copy it out of those systems, and we put it in a very, very secure database in the hospital, but a new database called I2B2 now. It's a new database. And it has all the different kinds of data. That's an inpatient and outpatient data. It actually has now 9 million patients in it, 9 million. And it has many billions of what we call facts on the patients. So really the data model behind I2B2 is very simple. Every time you know something about a patient, you call it a fact, and it's got the patient's identifier. You have what you know and the time that you know it. Because like a laboratory changes with time, so you want different times, different laboratories over different times. But once you have those pieces of information, you can make a very, very large table, billions of rows long. And you would think that then it would be too big to do anything with, but actually databases are very, very efficient at searching that. So you can search a 5 billion row database within just a few milliseconds. And that's actually what Kavi was doing in the demo he gave. Now, step one is to use the query tool that Kavi showed in order to find the patients that you want to study, or that you want to profile, or you want to know what the practice of medicine in those patients is. It could be all the patients, but often it's a subset of patients. And then once you get that list, and that's all anonymous, so all you get back is the number of patients that suit that profile. Once you do that, you can go to step 2 at Mass General Brigham. And this is different in every country, in every hospital in the US. There's a different way to do the second step. We go to what we call the Institution Review Board, the IRB. Every single time you want just one patient name, you have to go through the entire board. You have to apply. You have to say why it is that you want that, and what you're going to do with the data, how you're going to destroy it when you're done. And then, if you get permission, we put that little data set together of just the patients and just the data that you need. It goes into a secure place, usually a secure laptop or server. It gets used. You can run SAS programs, R programs, Python programs. Once you're done, then the data goes away. It goes into an archive, actually, because they want a record of the research for lots of reasons. So it all stays in this very secure loop. And in the next slide, you'll just see this is a list of all the different things that we have to do in order to keep the data secure. So we give patients actually a notice that their data is going to be used for research. This is a requirement. It's not a consent, it's just a notice. It's anonymized when you use the query tool. So when you use the query tool, the data is anonymous. You only get numbers of patients. We actually follow, there's a log. There's a log of all the queries that are done. So if something's suspicious, if even the anonymous data queries, it can lock you out. We only put in data that belongs to the hospital. So data that doesn't belong to the hospital, that we don't have the right to use, we don't use that. And step 2 can only be initiated by what we call the established medical investigator. So it's not like everybody has access even to the tool. Just established medical investigators and their staff and students, right? And they can actually watch what their students and staff are doing. And then, of course, so only studies approved by the Institutional Review Board get actually the data itself, right? So those have to be to get the data itself. You can use the query tool if you're an established medical investigator. So all the established medical investigators and all their staff and students can use the query tool. But to get the data itself, you must go through this whole process of asking and justifying to get the data set. Next slide. Now this is an important slide. So all this really is how many data sets from 2002 to 2019 did people get? And you can see it started very small because people didn't really know what to do with the data. They're like, why am I even using this tool? And then their imagination goes wild, right? And they're like, oh, I know, we can use it for this. And so we actually, you would think that it would just, you would start using the tool and then it would just kind of level off. But actually, you see, it even gets faster and faster and faster. That's because people are getting educated. They're often educating themselves on how to use the data and what it's useful for. And then they get new ideas, and then you get, so that's why you have this almost exponential increase rather than just kind of a leveling off of the data use. Next slide. So, good. So here we have established, once we did this and kind of figured it out, we established a new open source program, which Diane Keogh, who's going to talk to us, is the CEO of this nonprofit open source foundation. And it began to develop, and we got a government grant to develop I2B2. Very complicated name, informatics for integrating biology in the bedside, but it's easy to say when you just say I2B2. And the software is used to organize everything like we said, but also, this is very important, what you're going to see is new analyses that are very specific, perhaps only to your hospital, that you can add. So you can add new analyses to the tool. It's open source. It's only just the math, right? The data always stays in the hospital, never goes anywhere, unless you have some arrangement. The data always stays, in almost all cases, at the hospital. It doesn't go anywhere. You build a new tool, usually like CDAC would build a new tool, or some of the computer people would build a new tool, or you get one off the internet. Just the tool itself, so like an R program or a Python program, and then you can run it on the data and you can add it to the software system, such that it's a new portable and extensible application framework that's created. Next slide. And so there's a whole community of software. So if you want to do genetic research, for example, there's a whole bunch, there are plugins that you can download from this internet to work on the genetic data. There's no genetic data on the portal, right? It only allows you to work on genetic data, for example, that you already have in your laboratory or in your hospital. But it's an exchange of tools, not data, but tools on the portal. And that's at community.i2b2.org. So if anybody wants to go there right now, community.i2b2.org. Next slide. And there's over 250 different hospitals that use I2B2. It did start in the US, but then it quickly went to Europe, in Asia, and now in India, and even in Africa. Next slide. So what are we using it for? So the US government is still very interested in this software and developing this software. And it's been very interested in what we call long COVID syndrome, which is after people get COVID, they still suffer. And so there's a very significant number of patients that even after the COVID is supposedly cured, they're still very tired, or they can't think very well, or they get kidney problems. So in the next slide, you can, so based on our implementation of I2B2 and able to collect data, and I'll show you just like what you're all talking about, we got this long COVID study at Mass General Brigham. Next slide. And so far we found that it could be that almost 20% of COVID patients have some kind of after effect of COVID. Next slide. Now here's kind of what it does. It helps, in this study, it helps characterize the incidence and prevalence of long COVID syndrome, characterize the clinical course of long COVID syndrome, and define some of the pathophysiology because it has data in it, such as imaging even on the lungs of patients who had COVID. Next slide. And it has about 40,000 patients, adults, pediatrics, and autopsy as well. Next slide. Now, we actually collect a lot of the data first with a survey, exactly like you were just talking about, right? So it's a survey, the survey goes to the patients, and then the data from the patients goes into I2B2. But it's a survey, just like we were talking about. Next slide. And then what you can do is you can actually look at, you remember how Kavya was pulling over different parts of the survey essentially, or the data, and putting them in the boxes. And the boxes are trying to become, and in the next slide. So this is just the survey data. And here you see what we've done is we've pulled one of the survey data elements over, and we've said, okay, were you acutely infected? This is trying to be a Venn diagram. And so what's it going to say is, we pull over fatigue, and that says, are you in the acutely infected cohort, and do you have fatigue? So it's like putting those two things together, right, in an and. And then we can even pull over what kind of population are you. So we have a community health center who does surveys, as well as hospitals and others. So we only wanted to know how many were from the community. So this means we pull over how many were enrolled when they acutely were infected, not after. They weren't enrolled after, they were enrolled during infection. How many then afterwards had fatigue and were in the community health center. And you can see here it says 2 patients. So out of the 40,000 patients, there are 2 who had this. Next slide. Now, what's really the best part of I2B2, it only gets data, like I'm saying, this data only gets, we only put it into I2B2 once a month, just once a month. So it's all a month old. But I2B2 is not used to do day-to-day hospital affairs. It's used to do these kinds of analysis and find patients later and understand the practice later. So we can put all different kinds of data into I2B2 and do queries using all this different data. So in Recover, in this study, we have biorepository data from a biobank. We have electronic health record data. So besides the survey data, we also put in the electronic health record data. We get sensor data from watches that people have on. We get imaging data from MRIs and CT scans. We get mobile health data from data we collect in mobile health devices. And we get the REDCap surveys that we talked about. And all of that goes into this, and we can then analyze it and do queries on that data. Next slide. Now that's just one of many other networks we have. So we also have something we call the ACT network, which is in 70 different hospitals, and they they actually exchange queries, not data, just the numbers from the queries. And they, to help them recruit patients from very large numbers of different hospitals. We have the All of Us research program, which is a genetics program that the government initiated. And then we have the Emerge network, which is using this to get polygenic risk scores, or PRS scores. Next slide. During COVID, one of the reasons that they looked at us for long COVID is we also had 800 hospitals in 8 countries using I2B2, who were originated in I2B2, in order to collect data on COVID during the epidemic. So during the epidemic, there were about 20 different papers that came out from this consortium about how COVID was different in different countries, and we showed how that some of the times the data wasn't being collected properly, actually, so we actually looked at that. We showed that a lot of people who just had a positive test were being called admitted for COVID, and they really were just being admitted for something else, but they had a positive COVID test, so they were being counted that way. So there was many important things that we were able to show with this consortium. Next slide. And this is just emphasizing, so there's lots of different kinds of data that comes together, but I'm going to start talking about calculated data. So once you get data into the database, a lot of times what you do is you say, oh, so we're going to not just use the raw data, we're going to calculate data. We're going to visualize it, we're going to annotate it, we're going to do natural language processing on some of the text data. And then we're going to create what we call validated phenotypes, which are diseases that is confirmed from many different kinds of data on that patient. So that's like diabetes, confirmed by the fact that they're on metformin, confirmed by the fact that they have a hemoglobin A1C greater than 6.5. Next slide. And we've done this, these kinds of algorithms on about 80 different diseases. Next slide. Now you can also take that query tool that you saw and use it for special things. And so here it is being used just for genomics, so just for genomic queries. And here it is being used just for COVID queries. So you can do it for special things. Next slide. And we use it for a lot of industry collaborations. So we can jointly participate in many collaborations with industry because they can see the data that's being used in a joint partnership, but they can't see the patient. They only see the numbers. So that's very important. They only see the numbers, and that way they can see what patients we're having in the study, but only the numbers of patients we have, not the actual names of patients. It does not show you names of patients in the query tools because they can't do that step 2. See, they can't do step 2. Industry cannot do step 2. They can only do step 1. Next slide. So here's kind of how we can use I2B2 for reporting. So think of I2B2 building thousands of queries. Now, you might say, well, that would take you a long time. But the fact is that queries do get built over time, and we have about 54,000 queries per year built in I2B2 at Mass General Brigham. But we can then run them all automatically. So you don't have to run it by hand every time. You can run it automatically to create a report. And so you can use that, and then you can use the fact that it can do these special computed diseases to find diseases that aren't even actually being entered in the data. It's just being derived from the labs and the medications. And it can organize information from language, so it can use natural language processing. Next slide. So here's a typical query. So these are males who have diabetes on metformin. Next slide. And you see, you can start to do breakdowns. This is just by age. It's too small, but this is like 0 to 9 years old, 10 to 17 years old. So it's just different ages of patients across the bottom, different groups of ages, and then different numbers of patients. So it's just doing these breakdowns, which I'm sure you've all done, in many cases with your analysis. Next slide. And think of this as data that's in a timeline, right? So here we have a patient who is on metformin, had a hemoglobin A1C, 8.4, and who's on Byetta, and that means we compute that they're in diabetes. So now we only have pharmacy and lab data, but we can actually compute that they have diabetes. So that goes into the database as well. Next slide. Oh, next slide. And we can use more complicated things like notes. Next slide. We're going to go fast now. And we start to get these kinds of profiles. You see, here's just, people using different kinds of diabetic medications and what they look like in their practices. That's all it's saying. What are they doing in their practices? And you can see this is just by different gender, right? Male is blue, female is green, and the age. And it looks, you're like, well, what does that mean? Next slide. Well, you can see in this case, when you look at the practices, you see that it's only being used for younger females. It doesn't get used for older females. And that actually turns out to be because SGLT2s pump glucose into the urine, and older females get UTIs, and so they can't, and so they can get very sick from it. So you can see that if you just look at practices, you can think of it, well, what are other people doing? So you avoid doing that yourself, right? But it also gives you clues and hypotheses in terms of like what's important in medicine. Because many of you as doctors know very important things about medicine, but you never write them down, you never put them anywhere, but you're practicing that way. And this shows how it is that you're practicing. Next slide. Okay, so thinking of this as a timeline, next slide. You can think of different medicines that people are giving in different cases. So are they starting with insulin and then going to metformin, or are they starting with metformin and then going to insulin? Next slide. And then if we look more of a timeline, next slide. And we'll just click through these. So here's hemoglobin where the medication is started. This is the hemoglobin A1C value. You see people are waiting until the hemoglobin A1C gets pretty high before they start a diabetic medicine. And then it works pretty well. So in this case, the GLP-2 are working pretty well. Next slide. Insulin actually isn't working as well. See? It actually goes down just a little bit, and then it comes up almost after 4 years, which is over here, even higher than it was 4 years before. So next slide. And you can do this for lots of different things. This is weight, how weight changes when you start medicine. Next slide. And you can put this together in a little book, right? So you can actually, you can do the study with I2B2 and then put it together and give it to people who don't know how to use I2B2, right? But it still gives them a profile of the practice. And next slide. Or in something like an app, right, that give these profiles. So people can actually look up, I wonder how you would treat this patient. What's everybody else doing for a patient, with this medicine, and how well is it working in getting their hemoglobin A1C down, and so you can look it up. So there's lots of ways that we can actually just kind of look at this just for practices, looking at practices. So overall, there's lots of uses for I2B2. Just observing what's happening, using it to recruit patients for clinical trials, using it for quality improvement programs, using it to select profiles of patients that you want to follow to see how well medicines are working or how their weight are coming down. So, it's all in your imagination, though. It's all in your thinking. The tool doesn't do anything except allow you to ask questions. So, thank you.
I usually have to go really quickly because he's taken too long and has too many slides and he has a lot to say. So I'm actually not going to really talk about I2B2. I'm just really going to take a minute or two to just say how delighted I am at this point in my career to be able to watch the beginning of your journey. I have been doing this. I worked for a company like CDAC when in the very early days. I've been doing this for well over 35 years. And in the beginning, I installed systems exactly where you are right now. Registration, billing, clinical systems, and I saw how it transformed hospitals and patient care and clinicians. We also made a lot of mistakes. Technology was not that good back then. You're in a much better place than we were. We would have hardware crashes and things would be down, and so you're in a much better place. I moved through that. I installed systems across the United States. I landed at a hospital in Boston, and I became the Chief Information Officer, where I worked for 10 years, really watching how it supported quality and patient care. And so I saw all that. That hospital became part of Partners Healthcare, which is a big hospital network with Mass General, and I moved into corporate, and and I was responsible for integrating clinical data from all various systems, because they all had different systems. So I saw that, and I saw how it really changed the way the provider had access to patient information. Patient would come in and they could see all of the lab data and the pharmacy data from all of the hospitals within our network. It was major. I had infectious disease doctors say that we had saved lives of patients. And that was really great. I'm not a doctor. I wouldn't even want to play one on TV. I'm just not, but it was wonderful. And then I moved into supporting research because it was a large academic medical center. And that's where I met Sean, and he had invented this system for the hospital. So I was able to watch that journey, and I was part of the grant, the federal grant that supported the development of I2B2, and I was able to watch that move throughout the US. Sean says over 250 hospitals are using it. I don't think that number is actually correct. I think it's much, much higher. It's open source, so we don't even know all of the hospitals that are using it. And independently, people are doing unbelievable things. We don't manage those hospitals. We don't even necessarily know. We see their publications every once in a while. The way I find out how people are using the system is I go to our informatics conferences and I see presentations. And so it's really, it's been a fantastic journey. And watching you have, I'm so glad that there's CDAC is here. You have leadership that's driving this. Those are two key. And we visited the hospital yesterday, and the people were proud of showing us the system that they were using. So it's just the beginning of a wonderful journey, and it's not going to take you 35 years to get to where we were. So just delighted.
And what I have understood in this thing, there is a huge scope of work. I2B2 is a great thing to start with. Open software, we can log in. Before I start teaching my students, I will enroll myself to learn the clinical data science Coursera free version. I will train myself first how to use it best. I am happy to say after your visit that we are compliant. My hospital is compliant. I can very easily join you with my data and analyze my data which is available. Second thing, what we plan, we will immediately go through we have got huge burden of NCD and very huge burden of tropical diseases. We will first address the tropical ones, which is the call of the day because it has got lot of morbidity and mortality. And we will capture this data, we will analyze it, and then we will also form the research question and provide. That is the way I look at it, and I am happy I am the part of this great team. And in next 3 months, you will definitely see many more inputs coming from us. That is the way I look at it.
I would call it a one-stop shop for all our problems. We working as an NGO in a very rural area. We are always in crunch of funds, and we were really facing this challenge whether to give funds for digital analysis or medicine or research or screening or diagnostics. So we, as sir said, we are proud of our volume of patients, but we are lost without the analysis, and we couldn't do that because we didn't have funds for that. So if in this open source system, if we can really get help from I2B2, we will also can relate with the global scenario where we are working for sickle cell anemia in a smaller part of Maharashtra, where it has become a major problem, and our government is also speaking about having it controlled by 2015. So it's a challenge for our country, and definitely with our in-house resources like CDAC, we can work on such platforms locally. So it's really a one-stop shop for NGOs like us.
Scale it and how to have funds, right? So when you are on the journey for sharpening your axe or looking at insights, you require a whole lot of skills. You require to be able to tell your story. You need to be able to speak to the right people. There's a lot of money, there's a lot of funds, but you need to do that. And I think that's an important aspect. So tooling is important. As sir said, education is important. Having the courses is important. And having the training on how to apply for that funds, right? Definitely, that's what's needed, both at an organization level, but also at an institutional level. Can there be fellowships, right? So in the US, when someone does research, a clinician wants to do research, there is a concept of protected time, right? To a certain extent, the institution says, okay, we're going to give you 20% protected time for academics, right? Do that. And for a certain amount of time, for a year or two. And in that time, they're supposed to write and get grant for it, right? Okay, good.
Department in the university. So, 3 quick points that after listening to all this, and in fact the case has been laid by Dr. Ojha just now. I feel first of all the university requires to have maybe half-yearly or quarterly boot camps where the leadership is taught and made aware of such a thing that is existing. The next thing, they carry with them back to their colleges and institutes modules for the undergraduates and postgraduates where they can impart this knowledge, because every person need not come here. And as regards the AYUSH, of course I was also wondering that in such a meet and henceforth thereafter, we have such wonderful organizations, institutes and hospitals, especially Ayurveda, homeopathy and Unani. They run hospitals, they run health colleges. They have to be involved as far as the data capture is concerned, because I was just seeing the presentation by Dr. Sean, and most important is to have this data captured over the cohort in a longitudinal fashion where we can go back and check. I somehow, in my limited exposure of late, I have realized the data is somehow there are huge gaps. So it's a requirement, such platforms will be a big help as far as documenting the utility. It's there, it's known, but it's somehow not as yet evidence-based. So that's my
together. You can actually network them together. You can network the hospitals together so they can all see each other's I2B. So you can do that if you want to. It doesn't do that when you first install it, but you could do that if you want to, just for the hospitals working together.
The discussion here. After the inauguration, because they have got some MOU signing and we got dignitaries joining online, so we'll take a break right now and we'll continue. So make sure you take a break and we'll join back.
On behalf of Maharashtra University of Health Sciences Nashik, again welcome all the dignitaries, teachers, students, university officers for the MOU exchange ceremony. In the morning session, we attend a very informative and knowledgeable lectures from the stalwarts of the data sciences and the healthcare for education, research and public health. In this session, we are signing 3 memorandum of understanding with truly the global leaders I2B2, Trans Smart Foundation and Laboratory of Computer Science, Massachusetts General Hospital and affiliate of Harvard University of USA. Center for Development of Advanced Computing, CDAC, Noida. Omniculus Healthcare Private Limited, Karnataka, in this function. Honorable Vice Chancellor of MUHS, Lieutenant General Dr. Madhuri Kadikar Madam will preside over the function. Honorable Joint Director of Directorate of Medical Education and Research and Management Council member of MUHS, Dr. Ajay Chandanwale sir, is online joined for this function. I invite Assistant Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School, Dr. Kavishwar Vagulekar sir, to kindly elaborate the concept of MOU with MUHS. Dr. Kavishwar.
So I'd like Sean also to speak. MOU is about how we can work about how we can use this story, the story of what has happened in the West, how we can avoid the mistakes. And actually, as Diane said, things are different, and I see that MUHS has got tremendous acceleration. And if the acceleration continues, it will easily surpass everybody else in the world. And I think that's what this is about. Like, and how do we grow together the medicine, not just allopathy, also Ayurveda and all other things. The MOU is about how we can use the learnings, especially on data science, which this team has, and the expertise that they can bring, work with CDAC, work with other players in informatics, to create this field, create this platform to empower the spirit in the clinician here for improving practice. So I think the data is enabling that spirit to improve and not just be routinely carrying out care. That's my 2 cents.
It's kind of part of the rebirth, I guess, of education, right? Through the Vice Chancellor, there's many. It's just one piece, right? One piece of many new things that are coming into place. And this piece helps all of the education of students, residents, and senior clinicians about the practice of medicine and surgery. And what is it that's actually happening? What can you learn? Just like a doctor learns by seeing many patients over a very long time, this lets you see many patients, but now in a much shorter time. So you can look over many, many patients in a shorter time and learn much more in a shorter time than you would if you had to wait and your whole lifetime to put it together. But that isn't, and that's how doctors learn today. And this is just a new kind of electronic way to help doctors do the same thing they've been doing for many, many years in a shorter time.
Of Medical Education and Research and ex-Vice Chancellor of MUHS, Dr. Dilip Maiskar sir is also online joined this MOU exchange ceremony. I welcome him. I also invite Executive Director of CDAC, Center for Development of Advanced Computing, Noida, Mr. Vivek Saneja sir, to kindly speak a few words.
For this event, and warm welcome to all the dignitaries who have joined online. So we're really glad to contribute our bit for the modernization of MUHS. And I think the past association that we have had with you on the ideas has probably given us now somewhat of a cushion where we know that we'll get support from you. And we are committed to take your vision forward in terms of providing solutions for the automation and the digitization of the workflow for MUHS. Of course, CDAC is already working with DMER on the ISU implementation across the entire state of Maharashtra, and looking at the possible opportunities that are presenting with the discussions today. I'm sure we can go a longer way. So again, on behalf of CDAC, thank you for inviting us, and we look forward to this exciting journey with your guidance. And I give my personal commitment to you that you will have all the support from CDAC on this. Thank you.
Lead Strategic Partnership, Omnicurus, Melbourne, Australia. Soumya Jayakrishan Madam, to kindly elaborate the concept of.
It's an honor for me to be here, representing Omnicurus Healthcare. I think we've also had, earlier collaborations with MUHS in terms of creating continuous medical education, but that was the need of the hour. What's the need of the hour? And basis on that, we used to create a lot of content, digital content for our students. But today, I am so proud to collaborate with MUHS, being the one-stop solution for medical education for the MUHS students and faculty. And and Omnicurus is going to collaborate. We're going to create a digital library for the MUHS students and faculty. We're going to make it very seamless. And here we create multiple webinars, e-learning, continuous professional development, anything to, that's when I had met VC ma'am a couple of months back, and she said that, hey, I need a digital platform, I need a digital library for my students, and where they can access content anytime at their single click of a button, at their hostel, at their classes, at their schools, colleges, anything. So we're going to create and launch a learning management system for the Maharashtra University of Health and Science, and where we're going to create, with the support of the chair professor, we're going to create multiple e-learning webinars, continuous medical educations, one-year hybrid programs, many interactive and formats for students for continuous learning. And I hope I'm able to kind of, we as an organization, Omniculus, can kind of create much more, we can add value to the students and faculties of Maharashtra University of Health and Science. Thank you very much.